Hello and welcome to Culture Over Coffee, a podcast focused on improving company culture and fostering employee engagement. Every week we chat with experts and thought leaders about the latest information and proven practices you can use to reduce regrettable turnover, increase productivity on your team, and retain key customers. So pour a cup of your favorite brew and join us. I'm your host, Beth Sunshine, SVP at Up Your Culture and the Center for Sales Strategy. In this episode, we're exploring how companies can go about bridging two different cultures following a merger or an acquisition, and helping us break that down is Miracle Semien, CRO of Veaux Professional Services. Miracle brings so many great insights to light, like how an aligned culture or a lack thereof creates a ripple effect throughout the company that is inevitably felt by your customers. Why the first 90 days are the most crucial time when bridging cultures between two organizations after a merger. And lastly, why leaders need to clearly and consistently articulate the behaviors they want to see exhibited by their people. So hello, Miracle, and welcome to Culture Over Coffee.
Thank you so much. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Me too. And thank you for joining me. I've been so looking forward to this discussion with you. You're an HR professional, but you have a passion for culture and expertise in mergers and acquisitions. And I just find that to be such a powerful combination, very unique. And so I'm excited to talk. Like me, you're focused on helping organizations increase employee retention, improve performance and productivity, and create a thriving workplace. So we most definitely are on the same mission, which I think is fun. So many of the organizations we work with have dealt with some pretty transformative change during our time together. And I think going through a merger or an acquisition, it's at the peak of the scale of that kind of transformation and change. I think it can really rock their culture boat when things like this happen. I can't wait to hear your perspective. And I've got a bunch of questions to ask you. So are you ready to get started?
I'm ready.
Okay, good. So we'll dive in. The first question I wanted to ask is whether you could just share your thoughts on how culture integration can either make or break a merger or acquisition.
So culture integration definitely makes or breaks the success of that merger and acquisition. And when it comes to M&As, a lot of organizations focus on the financial strategy. So we have all of the gurus, and we're really trying to figure out, is this a good plan? But I feel like we forget to really take the necessary time to think about these two cultures coming together. Because if they clash, it can derail the whole entire thing. And that will lead to confusion, retention rates going really high, resistance. And so I don't know if you know this, but 70 to 90% of M&As fail to achieve their strategic and financial objectives due to people issues. And the interesting about culture, and you know this, culture directly affects and influences morale first. So morale goes down, and then it goes into customer satisfaction, because if I'm sad, I'm stressed, I'm not really treating my customers in the same way of value that they should. And then it affects the bottom line. So this is this ripple effect. And so I don't know if you've been a part of a merger and acquisition or even know someone, but I have. And when I tell you I wasn't doing anything, I wouldn't say I was on the integration team. I was still in HR, but I wasn't even a smoker. And we would go outside around the smoking area and literally just talk about rumors or what we think was going to happen. And so productivity was downhill, and we did nothing for probably the first 6 months.
That's a shame. And that's a shocking number. You said 70 to 90% fail to reach their objectives because, very specifically, the people part of it.
Yes.
That's enormous, because so much thought and planning goes into any merger or acquisition. I mean, so there's so many strategy meetings and, timelines built out, so much thought, and to think that the most common reason that they would fail would be culture.
Culture. And it's such an interesting dynamic, and you touched on it earlier. A merger and acquisition is such a different environment. And so if we're dating, it's not that I'm not going to tell you everything that's going on or everything bad about me. I'm just going to focus on the good. And so you have these merging cultures, and I'm just telling you all the great things, but I'm not telling you, we don't start meetings on time. It's our culture to come to work and you actually go get coffee first. And then after you get coffee, then you start. So emails aren't answered till around 9:00. And then you may have another culture that's like, no, I'm answering emails at 8:00. And so how do we merge this dynamic of stuff? And we don't even know to address it, because you know how hard it is to articulate culture. You have to have a very good grasp on what's happening or what's not happening to even talk about those issues.
That's true. It's true. We often call those the unwritten rules.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the things you're going to find in the employee handbook or, in all of the things that will come to light in an LOI or something like that. It's going to be the stuff that unfolds. And I like the dating analogy. That was good. So another question for you, what are some common hurdles companies face when merging two different workplace cultures? And tacking onto that, how can leadership teams help? How can they spot these things, maybe tackle these cultural differences early on to prevent fallout later?
Yeah, so that culture misalignment, that's always a huge one. You just don't know, and then we're not taking the time out to really talk about our systems, our beliefs, what do we appraise, what we don't appraise. And then for the employee, that is that stress that happens. So they just don't know, and it's that high level of confusion and resistance of even adopting the new one, because you get that us versus them. And so in that previous example that I've been a part of a merger and acquisition, it was something as simple as they didn't change our badges. So we knew based on badge color if you were the other, because it was a large organization. It wasn't like we knew everybody. And so we're like, oh, they have the red badge and we had the green badge. So it was very much us versus them. So you want to make sure that alignment and integration of culture happens relatively quickly. And we know the symbols those are symbols that some organizations don't even think about. Like, oh, we should change the badges because you can identify who was the us versus them. Wow. And then another one is, of course, that retention issue. But here's the thing. So when there's uncertainty happening and you let's say you, Beth, was a high performer, you're 10%er, right? And so you're like, wait, this isn't aligned with my personal values. I don't know where I fit in. There's some uncertainty. You leave, right? So most of your high performers do leave because they have the option. They're high performers. But what does happen during mergers and acquisitions, I like to call them the steady eddies. So these are your consistent employees. They're around the 3. They do their job. They go home. They stay, but they're not doing anything. So that's majority of your workforce is just not doing anything because of that productivity. So you got to be very intentional about that retention and what are we doing for the rest of the steady eddies that we get them to actually do work during this time. And then another thing that happens is the integration speed. So in a merger and acquisition, the first 90 days is the most critical time. So you have to live in a world leadership where you can make decisions quickly, but then you want to make sure you're considering your employees and is this organization even ready for what we're implementing? But then you don't want to be too slow because, like I said, those first 90 days are so crucial. That's where you lose a lot of people. Your high performers are like, I'm out. And so you have to make decisions fast, but still do your due diligence and not take a long time to make decisions and get that communication out. So it all happens in the due diligence stage. So when you're even trying to evaluate, is this a good deal or not? Should I acquire this team? Should I merge our companies? You have to sit down and really think about, how can this be successful for the people? That 90-day plan needs to be spelled out to the T. You should know what you're doing, when you're doing, and then be agile for changes. Because I know the company that I was with didn't take into consideration that the badges would be a big thing. But once you hear about it, you got to make some decisions really quickly. Okay, we need to get everybody new badges, So having flexibility to make change quickly, but have your ear to the streets, knowing what's going on with your employees. I think that's really key in a successful merging.
It's such an interesting dance, because you don't want to come in and change everything for people who are now new to the company. You don't want to, you want to, as a leader, maybe a CEO, you want to be able to size things up and let people sort of adjust. But, 90 days is not long.
Not long.
And finding that balance is interesting.
And making sure that employee is whole. I think, because when we're talking about culture, but we're looking at benefits package, like who gets what. How do you even roll out the stock split? Like, because sometimes a company can acquire another one, so your stocks are gone, or does it roll over? Like, any of those things, you have to be so careful to think about, how do I don't change people's entire world
Right.
on day one,
Right. That's right. So how can companies keep the best part of each culture when they're building a unified team, not lose the secret sauce, the flavor of who they are, but yet come together into this new, hopefully even stronger culture?
Such a good question. So I always want leaders to come together and let's talk about the good things that each company has, like you said. But most organizations is stopping right there. At VPS, we call them 16 cultural paradigms that we want to benchmark what we should be happening. And this is just qualities that teams have to be successful. So if we're looking at a company A and they're like, oh, these top things we do well, but we don't want to forget about the things that we just don't do, or it's not an issue, or it's not really a problem. But once you merge it, you're like, oh, okay, now it's an issue. So having something to benchmark what a good culture looks like, so we can take both things that the companies do well, but also address the gaps. And this will be a really good time to be intentional and not just figure it out. So you want to say, okay, we do this well, but this could be a potential, issue that we may face. And the activity that we do there is assumptions. So let's throw up all the assumptions that could happen, and let's come up with a plan, or how could this affect our employees, or what if this happens, and how does that do a ripple effect for everybody? Because you want to make sure that, like I said, the employees are all whole. And with people, you never know what is the trigger to now be in that 70 to 90% of mergers that aren't successful.
So intentionality is key. Probably communication, from what I'm hearing from you too, is key. Do you have any success stories you can share about culture integrations, maybe after a merger, that maybe went right? That, you could point to what companies did to get it right, or of course, if there's anything that's specific they did wrong, it'd be nice to hear that too. But any success stories specifically?
Yeah, there's a lot of wrong, but there is a lot of success. And I love it. It usually comes down to two things. It comes down to those leaders who have a clear vision and can actually articulate what they want to see. And of course, the behaviors that they want to see, because we can all say, safety first, but I always use this analogy. If you're talking to my 7-year-old and you ask him safety first, he's going to be like, what do you want me to do? What actually do you want me to do? When we are talking to our children, we don't give them a goal to stop jumping on the bed. We're very clear on stop jumping on the bed. I want you to do X, Y, and Z. So those leaders that are able to articulate behaviors that I want to see. I see good success rates, and
Mm.
also the mid managers. The mid managers are everything, because you have your C-suite people making all the decisions, staying up at night, making those decisions. But that midline managers, they kind of set the tone for everything. So if you as a executive are not including them into decision making or just giving them guidelines, they say it. They'll say, I don't know what's going on, or that's the decision they make. And then the employees actually trust their mid manager. So they pick on the same subtle energy that they have. And so making sure that the mid managers embody trust and there's a communication flow throughout. Because people say, I want to have or work for an organization that, embodies trust. But there's 3 components of trust. They need to be able to communicate effectively. I need to make sure they're competent. I want to know that you deserve to be a manager. But that third thing is character. So making sure that mid manager has the integrity, the sensitivity, the ability to instill trust into their employees to make it all flow. Because it's everybody. When it comes to culture, it's not just on the managers. It's not on the mid managers. It's a everybody mission and goal. So those are the 2 things that I see people do well that aren't in that statistics.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear, because a lot of what we do in all of the culture transformations we help organizations with relates to that mid-level manager.
Yes.
Certainly we need buy-in at the very top, and we need the leaders at the very top doing all the right things, modeling those behaviors, creating that culture. But it's the mid-level managers that make or break the culture. They have to truly believe in it. For example, a CEO can't just say, here are our core values.
Yes.
Our core values are quality, integrity, and responsiveness. Those are ours. And so from now on, that's what I want to see. And then expect for those to, spread throughout the organization and really come to life. They have to make those mid-level managers, first of all, they should be a part of that conversation. They should come up with them as well. They should feel ownership and buy-in. And therefore, when they talk to their employees about it, it comes from a source of passion. It's not corporate told us, but it's, here's what I believe. The other thing we focus a lot on is relationships. And I'm seeing how important relationships are when you say people trust their mid-level manager. And that trust starts by knowing your manager cares about you and has your back and has integrity. And those relationships are so key. So, probably part of the due diligence process should be understanding what, the character of those mid-level managers, the talent, and the relationships they've built.
Yes, and yes.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about communication already, but I did want to dig into that just a little bit more and ask you, how important is communication in bridging cultural gaps? And what can companies do to improve communication during a merger? I know sometimes there are things we can't talk about or we shouldn't talk about yet. It's too soon. And so there can be, some limitations. So what can be done about that?
Sure. So communication is essential in bridging those 2 cultures. But I wanted to take it a layer deeper first before we even what needs to happen for you to have effective communication. Because we say, communication is key, but you need to make sure the message is even right to communicate. So one of the things I would advise companies to let's talk about our decision making, because we know the first 90 days is so crucial. So what is our decision flow chart, or how do we make decisions quickly? And we also agree upon a number. Like if we have 75% of the information, let's go ahead and say something, or, we can communicate enough, or we have enough to make a decision, because we're not going to be in a position to have 100% of the resources and stats and data, and like time is of the essence. So let's, as a leadership, agree on, what do we need to have in place to make a decision, and who's the tiebreaker, who's making this decision is very clear. And then you want to be able to manage tasks, and then also be consistent with that communication. So let's make sure that's happening. And then the role of communication during a merger and acquisition, it should create the narrative. We need to make sure we stay on top of things, which is hard in the HR world, because we're usually reactive, but we need to be proactive. Everything about this time is crucial. So we need to tell employees the why behind decisions in different avenues. I want to see leaderships create videos. I want to see emails, of course. If we have Slack channel, we have posters. We need to utilize everything. Another thing that happens during mergers and acquisitions, when it talks to communication, because benefits could be changing and all of that, we talk to the family. Like, hey, let's talk to the wives, because they're usually making the decisions. So let's get the wives on the phone. Let's talk to the whole family. The second thing that communication should do is it should manage expectations. I need you to be upfront that things are changing rapidly, and there's certain things that I don't know, because if we don't tell them we don't know about this yet, they will make it up. So we don't want that to happen. So you want to manage expectations on the front end. That goes to, of course, being proactive. And then the last thing, you want to make sure that you are ensuring alignment and coordination, so people understand where they fit in the organization. And that's why, those mid managers are so important, because the executives are 2 years, 3 years down the line, but that receptionist, like, how does she fit in all of this? And that is tailoring our communication and alignment to just not talk at them, but come down to their level, and let's talk about how you fit in this new organization and expectations. So that is, I feel like, a long answer to your question.
Great answer. So chock full of good information. I love all of the different steps you provided. I love the fact that you started with the why. Why are we doing that? Sharing the vision, and even eventually, talking to each individual about what this means for them. And I love your mention of what happens when there's a vacuum. When there's a lack of information, it does get filled. It just doesn't always get filled accurately. So I think great information and really good reminders. Thank you. So how do you keep employees engaged and motivated through all of this? Because everything is changing. They don't know where they fit in. Even things like, I have a blue badge or a green badge and they have a red badge. I feel like there's a disconnect here. From big to little, there's so many changes. So how do you keep engagement high? And how can you make the transition feel smoother for every employee at every level?
So, great question. And the answer isn't this elaborate answer. During mergers and acquisitions, you need to keep things simple as possible. So you want to, the noise is happening. So we want to strip it down into what's the most important things that we can do, almost like getting back to basis. We always like to kind of hype up that initiative when we're merging cultures. Let's strip it down. Let's reevaluate things. Let's ask questions. Let's figure out, is this the best way to do things? And that way you can maintain productivity, because everything's changing for them. So you almost want it to be as simple as possible. For some organizations, we'll focus on, if you have we call them standard culture standards, we're focusing on one standard for the next 2 weeks. Let's just talk about one thing at a time. Let's figure out how we can do this thing right, and then we can move on. And that way you can be transparent. The leadership can talk about, like, hey, we are working on we keep on bringing the badges up, but we are working on this one thing right now. And I can give you updates because it's not all of the things. This is one thing. And then celebrate those wins. I don't care how small it is. You have to say, good job, we did this, because it's everyone's responsibility. So again, stripping it down and just going back to the basics and being simple, and then you'll start to see productivity still happening, and then we can maybe do a little bit more, but always go back to that basics, and it eliminates the uncertainty. If we're talking about all the things, let's talk about that one thing.
Yeah, great way to cut the noise. All right, so one last question, and it's simple but sometimes difficult to answer a question like this. My question is, if you could give one piece of advice for successfully blending two different company cultures together after a merger or an acquisition, what would that one piece of advice be?
Beth, I would say get help. You need to surround yourself around experts that know how to navigate culture. And I think companies out there, they naturally do it when they're starting the conversation for mergers and acquisitions, how to make a deal, how do we make sure our financial is in order. You need to do the same thing for that culture because it affects so much. And on top of that, you're dealing with the psyche of people, how they respond to change. You're dealing with motivation. How do we get them to just not all leave? And that's the reason why you either bought out that company or you want to merge, because you like what they're doing. We want to, decrease our sales, or we want to buy this department because it'll increase our workflow. So you need the people, but actually just taking a step back and realizing, like, I need somebody to guide me through this process because it's so crucial of the success. And I always say this, you can take the time and resources to get it right the first time, or you'll end up spending more money and more time fixing the problem later. So you might as well just try to get it right the first time.
Well said. Great piece of advice to land on. Thank you, Miracle, so much for the time that you spent today with me talking about culture over coffee. You shared really good stuff. I have no doubt that our listeners have found a lot here that's really valuable. So for those listening, I'm going to drop Miracle's LinkedIn information in the show notes so you can connect with her if you'd like, and I would recommend it. I'm also going to add a link you can use to grade your own company culture. This could be, involving some sort of a merger or acquisition, or it could just be to better understand the health of your company today. It's an interactive quiz. It only takes a few minutes. It'll give you a good sense of your culture's current health. And then it'll also make some recommendations that can help. So thank you, Miracle, and thank you to everyone listening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for spending time with us on Culture Over Coffee. If you've enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe and join us for every episode. For more helpful information on the topics of company culture and employee engagement, visit us at upyourculture.com.